Right, let's get started. I'm going to pass over to George. Good afternoon, George.
Good afternoon, Rich, and thanks everyone for joining. So I'm George Dellal. I'm part of Kaleidoscope Health and Care, where I lead on systems and collaboration. Prior to joining Kaleidoscope, I spent about 10 years over in America supporting and studying networks, clinical networks, and what makes them fly or flop. So as you can tell, I'm really passionate about networks and collaboration. Over the next 44 minutes or so, we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about the how of collaboration, getting really concrete about what makes collaboration work. But before that, I wanted to spend a few minutes thinking about the why. Why do we collaborate? I've recently been reading this fantastic book called Super Cooperators by a chap called Martin Nowak, who is a professor of maths and evolutionary dynamics at Harvard. And he notes that it's common to think about evolution in terms of survival of the fittest. And with that fitness comes strength, comes power, and comes control. And I've been thinking about the application to kind of our current landscape in health and care, where a lot of our mental models involve thinking about power and control and hierarchy. Interestingly, it's as Nowak kind of points out, top-down control doesn't actually apply so much to biology. And if you plot to the next slide about early studies of migrating geese, we used to assume top-down leadership was taking place here, and there was one goose leading the others to form a V to migrate across the Atlantic or wherever. And to prove this theory of top-down leadership, some biologists went out and they shot one goose. And sure enough, another goose took its place. And they assumed, oh, well, that's just the deputy kind of stepping in and applying that same top-down leadership. So they shot that one down too, and another goose stepped in. And what they eventually came to learn is that geese flock not because of the power of the sole leader, but because of aerodynamics and the selective advantages of corporations. Fortunately for us, we have evolved as human beings to become super cooperators. And as early hunter-gatherers, we really needed to collaborate and work together in order to survive, in order to bring up our children, in order to gather food, in order to hunt animals and fear off other predators. I don't know how many of you enjoyed a morning coffee this morning, but if you think about the thousands of years of kind of collaboration passed from generation to generation that made that coffee possible, from farming and growing and processing and supplying, let alone just a business that actually sold you the coffee. Yet, despite this kind of rich evolutionary history and that collaboration is very much in our DNA, we're still struggling. And that's why 50 or so of you have turned up this afternoon. And Nowak, in his acknowledgements at the end of the book, he says it's kind of a lovely and intoxicating thought that it takes a high degree of cooperation and collaboration to understand cooperation. And I'm so delighted to be joined by the other speakers today and all of you today to explore how we can understand collaboration at a deeper level. So what do we mean by collaboration? If you pop to the next slide, Rich, you can see our definition up here. So at Kaleidoscope, we define collaboration as working with others to create value together. And if you flip to the next slide, we say that this value can be created in four main ways. So there's four ways we can create value when we're working together as a collaboration. Number one, we can share voice. So this could be social movements, or this could be partners working together to lobby for, let's say, more funding and speaking with one shared voice. We work together to align plans, make sure we're not duplicating effort, stepping on each other's toes, and making sure that our approaches are coordinated. By sharing learning, so what's the best practice? How can we learn from that? How can we share? How can we learn from what hasn't worked and stop others making the same mistake? And then finally, bottom left, to share delivery. And so to work together to create something new together, a new pathway perhaps, or a new service. It's important to think that these aren't in competition with each other. They're not kind of mutually exclusive, and they might well change over time. So I've recently worked with a group that came together primarily to create value through sharing delivery, but they realized actually what they really needed in order to do that was some additional funding. And so they spoke as one voice and were able to achieve that funding, and that enabled them to share delivery. And so what's really important is that all of these mechanisms of value are really, really useful. But what's really important is that we're aligned and speak and clear about which one we're using. And the reason is so that we can structure our activities accordingly. So an event, for example, where people come together to share learning might look very different and have a very different setup and set of pre-work from one where we're primarily there to align plans or deliver together. Next slide. So what makes a collaboration effective? Well, at Kaleidoscope, a couple of years ago, we reviewed the literature and kind of pooled our collective experience and expertise, and we developed a model that we use to help collaborations become more effective. As you can see up on the slide, we think that effective collaborations share these 8 characteristics. They have a clear shared purpose, a focus on building the right culture, and the resources and structure to succeed. And what we've done is we've used this model to develop a diagnostic tool that we use with collaborations to help them understand what are their relative strengths and weaknesses. So if you pop to the next slide, you can see an example of how we've done this. So this was with one ICB, where we worked with the ICB to do that diagnostic model, do that diagnostic survey, and come up with which are the focus areas where the collaboration wants to develop together. And what's been really nice using this model, if you put to the next slide, is by creating reports like this and structuring conversations around them, it's enabled the partners to actually align together and work together to figure out what's the areas that they really want to develop and how can they collaborate more effectively. So we were able to help give them a structure and a plan to think about their development and work together.